The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud.
The customer wants faster payments for free with any application, and they want to pay as easily as nothing, and they want to be reimbursed if that goes to hell.
Yeah. Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. Have you ever seen one of those action movies where the two biggest movie stars team up? They put aside all their differences to turn their firepower on the bad guy with devastating effect. This is kind of like the approach that some compliance team are taking with FRAML. It's the combination of fraud and anti-money laundering teams, turning into one unstoppable force that can look at the financial crime picture in more of a holistic fashion. But much like those Hollywood blockbusters, some worry that this superpower team-up is more of a buzzword than an actual blockbuster. I'm your host Fredrik, and in this episode we're asking, is combining fraud and AML a fad, or is it the future? We'll be discussing how the merging of fraud and AML departments looks today, the challenges still to overcome with the FRAML approach, and what the future may hold. To dive into this topic, I'm here with Terje Aleksander Fjeldvær, Head of Financial Crime and Sanctions at DNB. Welcome to The Laundry, Terje.
Thank you.
This is your second time on The Laundry, and it's great to have you back. For any new listeners, could you talk a bit about DNB and your role?
Sure. Yes, Head of Financial Crime and Sanctions in DNB combines actually the fraud prevention area, preventing fraud against DNB Group and DNB's customers, digital fraud, scams, everything. And also the sanction screening responsibility that we have as a large Norwegian bank, but also a partner bank for 100 other banks doing their cross-border transactions. So it's quite a large task to do that. And also we have some geopolitical capabilities within my responsibility, like country risk lists and such.
Extremely relevant these days with all the geopolitical shifts that is happening at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to dive a bit into that in today's episode as well. But if we start off with more of the basics, so how did you come across the term FRAML? It kind of sounds like something that Elon Musk would be naming his next child, FRAML and FRAML. But how did you come across the term the first time? Do you remember?
Yes, I do actually, because I was at a global fraud conference in Las Vegas in 2018. So it's quite a long time. And then I was handed this book, which was FRAML for Dummies. So actually already then quite a long way to go to get there at that time. But many of the ideas may be now more relevant than then. And kind of futuristic at that time.
Do you remember any of the highlights from the FRAML for Dummies book? I'm thinking my question is actually what is FRAML, and how would you most efficiently explain it to our listeners?
Yeah, I think the idea is to combine several areas where you have kind of combine the threat picture and then combine the task that you want to solve, because it's not only for fraud, but fraud is in particular for banks, a quite large threat where people are having their money stolen. And for all crimes where you have criminal proceeds, you need to launder them to be able to use them. If I was stealing money from you, I transferred them to my own account and started using them, it would be very easy for the police to catch me and to prove that I have done something wrong. So you need people in between there. And we see that there's a close connection between victims of, for example, love scams, and they are also money mules. So laundering money from fraud might or might not be closely connected to AML and fraud. So that's why I think it's easy to kind of combine fraud and AML. But also for other types of crime, you need to launder the money, of course. But that also might be the same criminals that perform other types of criminality.
How separate are those types of activities in DNB, as an example, set up, the anti-money laundering teams and the fraud teams or the technologies?
Well, we are and have been for many years organized together like brothers and sisters. So the head of the AML section is in the same management group as I. So we have, for many purposes, close cooperation. To some extent, fraud, I will say, is more like a security question because we are providing security for the customer's money and the bank's money. It's in our own interest to keep that secure. We don't want to lose money ourselves. We want to maintain the trust in the company's services and products. So it's good for us in many ways to do that, and it's less compliance driven. Even though we see with new regulations that the banks has to take more of the losses for the customers in fraud cases, so it's in our own interest. When it comes to money laundering, it's much driven by compliance. So the tasks that we have to solve might be a little bit different, but we can also see that controls we do to prevent fraud also reveals money laundering, and there we have to cooperate. For the organizational purposes, we are closely connected, and also when it comes to IT development, we are part of the same portfolio and the same squad to prioritize our IT development kind of closely connected. And we also have the data foundation for all fin crime purposes.
Shared,
yes. At least that's an idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically for DNB, you would consider yourself having set up sort of a holistic approach already where FRAML is basically what you're doing, or would you say that it's still a bit fragmented and the idea is to share more of the technology and rather have separate teams working with industries expertise within the fraud group and then the AML teams?
We are not kind of working FRAML today because we don't use the same platforms, same systems, and we cooperate when needed. And I think you can come to a closer cooperation also with technology and moving forward. But I'm not certain that you should kind of combine everything either, because the tasks are different and the regulations are different, and you need to know kind of stuff very, very well to do a good job. And DNB is an organization with like 12,000 employees or something. We have a quite large security and fin crime environment, many people working with this, and the benefit of being large is that you can have very specialized people being very good at some tasks, and you cannot have everybody being that good at all tasks because that's just not possible. So some level of different it needs to be. We are cooperating with many things. We have a common threat intel service or group that works very close together. And of course, the criminals that work with fraud, they are also doing money laundering. They are defrauding the state. They are kind of doing drug-related crimes, violence, more and more we see. So they are the same kind of threat or the same enemy that throughout all crimes, more or less.
Would you say there's been a huge shift over the last few years when it comes to how we think about having a holistic approach and a total defense when it comes to financial crime, where fraud and AML is more interconnected?
Well, yes, I think the short answer is yes, but I will say a little bit more. We started with the fraud prevention systems with automated responses based on the user behavior and monitoring of transactions back in 2016, 2017. And what is with fraud is it's in the middle between cyber defense and AML. And with that, I mean you can use logs and user behavior and endpoint detection tools for preventing fraud, in particular phishing, for example, which is a large threat when it comes to volumes with the low losses because so much is automated in the response. And as soon as the transaction is gone, it's into the money laundering area. So it's kind of in between, and you use the same response as or the tools that you use both for cyber and analysis for money laundering. So you kind of use a very wide range of tools when it comes to fraud prevention.
So what type of trends have you seen over the last 5 years, say, when it comes to the shift in focus for AML and fraud working together?
So it's quite interesting because fraud was quite new when or at least the digital fraud prevention were quite new when I got the responsibility back in 2016. And we started with solutions for endpoint detection tools, looking into user behavior, transaction patterns with automated responses. And we use kind of technologies that or methods that were common for cyber defense before at an earlier stage. And as soon as the transaction is lost, it's money laundering. So we are in the middle between with a wide range of tools for fraud prevention. And then we see with the focus now on cost reduction for fin crime areas, for large banks has put more and more people to AML perspectives because of requirements from the government. And it seems like it has been easier to put more people into it, to show you take this very seriously, and also to do the tasks when the technology has to develop to actually fulfill those requirements. But now I think more and more banks are also looking into the cost efficiency of fin crime. It is not sustainable to always increase people, and the market is it's not enough skilled personnel also you can hire more people because it's so many. So when it comes to also the cost efficiency in the AML area, you're looking more into kind of automating things that has been done for some years in fraud and even more years in the cyber area. So I think combining the technology, looking into common shared technology platforms, data foundations, and the use of tools, I think that is important. And I also think that we see a trend now where the primary crime and the money laundering schemes are very closely combined. So maybe, for example, the use of credit cards in Dubai can be both at the same time. And the scenarios to catch that will be both things. And that makes us to a close cooperation and the need for close cooperation for the areas. So I think it has forced more automation, cost efficiency, closer cooperation. That's kind of...
And you did mention that within the AML space, it's more compliance guided. Would you say that, especially within fraud and maybe even more specifically for cyber, you've benefited from kind of looser guidelines as to what type of technologies and you could be using to catch the bad guys? I'm specifically thinking about AI, machine learning, and so forth, where historically and even now to a certain extent, AML process support platforms and so forth can't really use too much of a machine learning type of algorithm to better itself over time. Meanwhile, it seems fraud and the setup to catch fraud has been able to leverage those type of technologies much better.
I definitely think that we have been a lot freer in the fraud area, with less controls, kind of being able to work risk-based, and that has been the primary approach. And I think that has given us good results. That said, I was lucky to be in DNB when this thing was started many years ago. And for those who didn't do the same thing at the time, it has been more compliance-driven with PSD2. And then you have, for Norwegian purposes, Finansavtaleloven, kind of the regulation that protects the customer in the bank-customer relationship, where the banks has to reimburse more often. And then it kind of being forced on. So maybe not compliance, but financial losses in something that traditionally weren't financial losses. So you're getting forced to do something to not lose too much money. But you are free to work risk-based, but there's no regulator saying this is what you have to do. It says what's happened if you don't do it. So you can do it, your best effort working risk-based on that. So it makes you freer, and you can use kind of the technology that you feel fit. And I have one more kind of point here, and that is that the fraud prevention area increases the customer friction. So a bad fraud control is not good for the customer experience, which is really important to actually build in the security that the customer will never see. And that is a challenge because the customer wants faster payments for free with any application, and they want to pay as easily as nothing, and they want to be reimbursed if that goes to hell.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of build in the security. For earlier, we had the ability to delay a transaction for a control. With instant payment, you cannot delay an instant payment because then it doesn't work.
Exactly. And that's the trend now as well,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Where everything is moving towards real-time transactions, even cross-border.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And we'll be right back with the potential that we see in the future of FRAML as well. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, Stockholm! The Laundry is in town. The podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world is coming to Penningtvättsdagarna, Sweden's biggest event for the latest insights on money laundering and terrorist financing. Join us for a live podcast recording on March 12th in the bar, where we will be diving into a very hot topic. If everyone is an AI agent,
what's left for humans?
We will be joined by special guests and be bringing this spicy discussion to a live audience. Don't miss out. Want to attend? Grab tickets for you and your team to join us at the Stockholm waterfront on March 12th and 13th. We'll also be hanging out at the Strise booth, so please do come and say hi.
Hi.
Find tickets links in the show notes or visit penningtvättsdagarna.se for more information. Vi träffas!
Okay, having looked at how FRAML looks today, let's move the chat on into how this might develop in the future. So what are the challenges that you see around FRAML going forward? Because it sounds like a great theory, like the dream team of compliance superheroes joining forces to catch the bad guys. But in reality, what's standing in the way to make this work? Is it internal politics? Is it the technology? Is it the budgets? Is it the regulators?
Well, I think people that want to achieve cooperation, they will achieve cooperation. If you have the opportunity to cooperate, you will be able to do that. That said, it's not given that kind of the technology or thing you need to do it perfectly is clear already. Like there's a ton of new payment platforms coming in. You have to interact or integrate with them to be able to only maintain the same level of security that you have today. So building a lot of new things and at the same time keeping up while you're reducing the staff or maintaining the same level of staff, that's a challenge. So you must accept that you cannot do everything. But at that time, I think you can focus on cooperation and information sharing. I don't think the regulator will deny us with this. And I think with good purposes and the will to cooperate, I think you can come quite long and achieve a lot of things. What we see now is it's difficult with the change in technology, change in payment platforms, payment patterns, new applications to actually maintain the same level of security while all the new technology is being made. You have to kind of develop controls and integrations with all the new things. So doing that is a struggle in itself with also kind of the focus that is. You cannot just hire more people and increase costs when it comes to IT. You need to kind of maintain cost-efficient solutions. So that to build the technology that gives you the opportunity to do something like FRAML will come in addition to that. So of course cost, but I think like information sharing is key. If you cooperate by telling each other what you know, that's a good start for being able to take the bad guys. And if that is automated or if that is manual, that can be both. And you can start manually and then you can automate the things that gives the best effect.
And you coming into this with specific sanctions and fraud perspective, even though obviously you know a lot about financial crime as a whole, would you say there is a risk that hypothetically working within a FRAML framework, you would then be limited by those regulations that is inherent on the AML side from a compliance perspective, so that you and your team couldn't work agile enough or quickly enough in terms of the way that you iterate and develop defense, basically?
Yes, I think that's a risk, because it's always the biggest fish swallowing the smallest one. And I think actually FRAML is a too narrow expression, because I think we are more looking into financial crime prevention, and then you have to also combine sanctions, because the reason why I have the responsibility for fraud and sanctions, which is two totally different regulations. Of course, sanctions is highly regulated from many jurisdictions. We kind of have the US, the UK, the EU, the UN. It's many regulations, but it's the fact that we are the only ones actually blocking transactions real time. That's the link between those areas. And the way of working, we have set up the teams similarly with the different specialties, but the way of working with the data scientists, IT people, operations and investigations within one team, that has proven to work for both those areas. So you have to integrate the sanctions in the financial crime expression. But I also think that you have to take into account other business, economic crime, corruption, for example, which is also a money-giving type of crime. So you have to widen up and say it's the financial crime prevention area. And then I think you have to allocate resources to be able to specialize, because all the regulations and the way of working is so specialized that you cannot only have kind of people that know everything, because that's impossible.
That makes a lot of sense. I would also assume that it would be hard in terms of procuring new type of technologies as well, because like you mentioned, now you have expertise within the different teams, specialized on sanctions, specialized within the fraud domain, and specialized within the anti-money laundering domain. I was just thinking for vendors as well in the market. As an example of Strise, we work a lot with graph technologies and have huge amounts of data that could be utilized in the financial crime space as a whole. But we've focused strictly on AML because we want to be the experts within that, even though we know sort of our data set could be utilized across different domains as well. So I'm just thinking, I haven't seen anything in the market that comes in and says we would be able to support your complete infrastructure on financial crime with everything that you need from one solution. And probably for any vendor that would do that as well, it would be extremely hard to maintain with all of the developments on the technology side that is happening at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of to take fraud, AML, and sanctions, sanction screening is a binary control. Is this name on the list, yes or no? If no, then you send the transaction. So that's a totally different setup than for fraud, where you look at patterns to see, is this, for example, the hard ones, is this customer manipulated to actually authenticate the payment himself or herself? Is it the customer authenticating this transaction? Yes or no? That was what we looked into before. But now we are actually looking for patterns to see if this customer is manipulated to doing this. So, and that's kind of another ball game than the binary control from sanctions. And then you have AML looking maybe a long time back to see if it's a pattern that has developed over time to say this is a suspicion of money laundering. So the platforms, and they're looking for different things. That's an important thing. Then you can look into what we have done with the endpoint detection on fraud. And now maybe endpoint detection will be a requirement for sanction screening, because is the customer located in a sanctioned country? And using the bank from a sanctioned country, are we in the future going to block that customer's ability to use our product and services? If they are there, they're no sanctioned, they are not kind of doing anything wrong, they're just being at the place where the regulators don't like. Is that some kind of looking into that will change the game for sanctions controls very much, and starting to use other types of tools that will be more common with the other financial crime areas.
Yeah, because a lot of the talk is about a single source of truth, And that might be a potential risk then, that sort of you always follow the worst case scenario type of rule setups for each sort of domain. So like you mentioned now, an individual located in sanctioned jurisdiction hasn't done anything wrong, and there's no contextual sort of evidence to prove that the transaction is at risk in any sort of way, in any fraud case or criminal case. And similar, and it might be a transaction they are completely reliant on getting approved for their well-being and for whatever type of reasons, right? So yeah, it's interesting, that's for sure. If things play out now over the next 5 years, like based on the trends you're seeing, the push from the regulators and so forth, how do you see the space looking basically when it comes to FRAML?
I think there are areas where using, as I said before, the data foundation, structuring data that can be used across the financial crime area. I think that's a good way to go. I think it's kind of cost efficient for the bank as well, if you have one data set that can be used for different purposes, because even though maybe 70% is common, that's making that 70% with good data quality will give an advantage. And then you maybe must make 30% type specific for fraud sanctions and AML or KYC. And but building the ground and using that, and that I think is good. You mentioned also graph databases, and I think for many purposes, maybe all purposes, at least sanctions, fraud, and AML, graph databases will be key to understand the large patterns. If you have sanctions evasion, you will not be able to look into that without having help from a machine that can find the patterns, because you cannot kind of look into that by looking at the transaction, because there's no information there that can tell you if this is avoiding any sanction regulation or not. For fraud, it's key to understand the criminal networks, and also for AML, and also for AML to see kind of patterns of money laundering. So that's one area where I think it's key to have the same data. And I also think for investigations, if you can have a common master file on the customer, you will know what you know, instead of calling the person that you think might want to know or might know something about the customer. You have kind of a master system that contains the information that might be valuable, and then you can control the people using that with some restrictions to what you can read and not, and what is relevant for your job. But having one system to kind of be a master of information, I think that's good for investigations, but I also think it's good for the customer, so that the customer doesn't need to answer the same questions 4 times a year because we didn't know what we have asked before.
So we've talked a lot about the challenges of FRAML and its potential in the future. But how do you see this potential restructuring connecting to the real world and the customers and society?
I think it reflects society in a good way. The customers are more demanding than before. They require more kind of seamless use of bank services. They want us to know what we know, as I said. They want it to be swift. They want to have choices on security levels and decide themselves whether this is something they wanna go through with or not. They want to use as little time to be compliant with the bank's requirements as they can. So they want to answer for those questions at one time, not kind of several times answering the same questions or such. So I think it's a good customer service to do this right with as little friction that it's possible. And I think kind of the use of technology is important to achieve kind of those goals.
Thank you. And before we wrap up the episode, we have a few quick fire questions for you as well. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What are the biggest benefits of combining fraud and AML into one approach?
It's the holistic overview and cost efficiency.
What are the biggest disadvantages?
might be a trap. You might think that one person can do everything, which they don't.
Is a FRAML approach possible without investing in technology?
Not to the extent that I think the the term is meant, no.
Is FRAML a fad or is it the future?
If you expand the expression a little bit, it's the future.
Thank you so much for joining, Terje. And that brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Terje, where can people find out about and connect with you?
You can connect at LinkedIn, but please send a message. Why? Because I'm the skeptical guy.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out the back catalog of more than 100 episodes and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. We'd love for you to share the podcast on your social media channels, tell your colleagues about it, give us a 5-star rating. It really does help people find us. What subjects do you think we should be talking about? Comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Fredrik. Our producer was Matthew. Our editor was Dominic, and our engineer was Nicholas. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud. Visit strise.ai for more information. See you next time. Money makes a world go round. It makes a world go round.
The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud.